Ladies and gentlemen, what if someone out there isn't just thinking about you from time to time, but actually carrying you around like a secret they can't confess, like a flame they can't extinguish, like a memory that refuses to stay buried, no matter how hard they try to move on? What if the reason they can't release you has nothing to do with begging, chasing, or forcing your way into their life? What if it's because you did something far more powerful than any of that? You woke something up in them. You reached a part of their soul that had been dormant for years. And now they're not experiencing some casual, everyday kind of affection. They're caught in the kind of love that has them staring blankly at their phone, scrolling back through old conversations, hearing your voice echo in their head at 3 a.m., feeling their chest tighten the moment your name pops up unexpectedly. This isn't the polite kind of love that waits patiently outside. This is the kind that kicks the door down, walks straight into someone's mind, and sets up permanent residence. Carl Jung understood something most of us miss. The human heart is never as straightforward as it appears on the surface. What looks like simple attraction is frequently something much deeper. What feels like chemistry often works like a mirror. What we label as love is, more often than not, a hidden encounter between the person standing in front of us and some unseen territory buried inside ourselves. People don't always fall for who you actually are. They fall for whatever it is you stir up inside them. That's exactly why this matters so much. When someone becomes completely consumed by love for you, there's always a root cause. There's always a specific instant, a spark that shifted everything in their world. And here's the strange part. Most people never even understand what triggered it. They chalk it up to coincidence. They call it good timing. They assume the other person simply developed feelings out of nowhere. But the real story runs much deeper than any of that. Maybe you looked at them in a way that nobody else ever had. Maybe you actually listened when everyone else brushed them aside. Maybe you smiled at them with a gentleness they'd never experienced before. Maybe you walked away at the precise moment they were sure you'd stay, or stayed calm when they'd only ever known chaos from others. Maybe you told the truth when everyone around them was busy pretending. Maybe you carried yourself with a quiet strength that made them feel simultaneously protected and completely exposed. And without either of you realizing it, you turned into exactly what their unconscious mind had been searching for all along. This is the mystery Jung wanted people to grasp. The unconscious mind doesn't fall in love the same way the conscious ego does. The ego makes its selections based on logic, convenience, social standing, and outward appearance. But the unconscious operates on recognition. It whispers, "I recognize this. I've encountered this before. This person is revealing something about who I am." So when somebody becomes wildly infatuated with you, the real question isn't why they're so attached. The real question is, what did you wake up inside them? Maybe your kindness wasn't just kindness. Maybe it reminded them of love they never actually received growing up. Maybe your confidence wasn't just confidence. Maybe it reminded them of a version of themselves they'd lost somewhere along the way. Maybe your distance wasn't just distance. Maybe it made them chase after a feeling of earning something they'd never had to work for before. Maybe your beauty wasn't just beauty. Maybe it radiated an energy their soul recognized instantly. On some level, words can't fully capture. And the moment that recognition clicks into place, everything shifts. People don't always become obsessed simply because someone is flawless. Sometimes obsession takes root because that person still feels unresolved in their mind, because that person cracked open a door inside them, and now every other closed door in their life feels smaller by comparison. Because that person stopped being just a person and became a symbol instead. And symbols carry more weight than facts ever could. Pay close attention here, because this is where a lot of hearts get led astray. When someone can't stop thinking about you, that doesn't automatically mean they're in a healthy place emotionally. Sometimes it means they've been genuinely moved. Sometimes it means something in them has finally woken up. Sometimes it means they've stumbled onto a feeling powerful enough to shatter their usual habits and defenses. But sometimes it also means they're projecting. They're seeing in you every hidden desire, every buried fear, everything they secretly feel is missing from their own life. Jung called this exact phenomenon projection. We take our internal images and place them onto someone else. We grab the unresolved, unfinished pieces of our own soul and dress another person in them. We convince ourselves, this is the one. But what we're actually saying, underneath it all, is that this person happens to be carrying an image our inner world has been waiting its whole life to meet. That's precisely why this kind of love can feel so overwhelming, so intense. It was never just two people meeting. It's two minds colliding, two sets of wounds intersecting, two entire histories crashing together, two invisible inner worlds merging into one moment. Now here's something most people are too afraid to say out loud. Sometimes someone loves you this intensely simply because you made them feel something they'd never felt before in their life. And now they're hooked, not on your body, not purely on your attention, not even on the idea of you as a person. They're hooked on the version of themselves that showed up whenever you were around. Think about that for a second. Maybe being near you made them feel calmer than they'd ever felt. Maybe it made them feel more alive, more visible, more understood. Maybe it made them feel challenged in a good way, or soft after years of having to stay hardened. Maybe you made them feel masculine, or feminine, or secure, or safely vulnerable, or genuinely desired and valued for the first time in a long while. That kind of feeling doesn't just disappear once it's been felt. When a person stumbles onto something that fills an emotional void they didn't even know they had, they don't forget it easily. They start returning to it in their thoughts, in daydreams, in memory, in quiet longing. They catch themselves searching for your presence, even in rooms you're nowhere near. They start comparing every new person who enters their life to you, whether they mean to or not. And slowly, they begin to realize that what once felt like an ordinary, unremarkable life before you actually was emotional hunger all along. They just didn't have a name for it yet. This is why people so often say, I just can't explain it. Logic simply isn't built to explain a recognition that happens on the level of the soul. Maybe all you did was something small, one honest conversation, one calm response when they expected an argument, a moment of unexpected kindness, a comfortable silence, a certain glance, a well-timed joke, a boundary you refused to cross, a shared laugh, a text sent at exactly the right moment, or a goodbye that somehow stretched on longer than it should have. And that single, seemingly small moment became the seed of an entire emotional storm. Ladies and gentlemen, one action, however small it seemed at the time, can echo inside a person for years if they were ready to be changed by it. That's exactly why this message matters. Someone out there is hopelessly in love with you, and it's because of something you did. What was it? Maybe it was the way you made them feel important without ever making them feel small or humiliated. Maybe it was the way you never once begged for their approval. Maybe it was the dignity you carried while everyone else around them seemed desperate for attention. Maybe it was the way you showed them a love that felt genuinely rare, and then pulled back just enough for them to fully understand its worth. Or maybe it was simply this. You reflected their own shadow back to them, their fears, their insecurities, their hidden hunger to be chosen, to be healed, to finally be truly seen. And the instant they saw themselves clearly through you, you stopped being just another person in their life. You became something else entirely. You became a mirror to them. And mirrors carry a certain danger in matters of love, because people rarely desire only what they see reflected back. They desire what that reflection reveals about themselves. Jung believed each of us carries an inner opposite, a hidden counterpart we frequently project onto others. This explains why certain connections feel almost predestined, Why people sometimes say, meeting them felt like remembering someone. It isn't always fate in the cinematic sense. Sometimes it's simply the psyche recognizing a familiar pattern. Sometimes a person feels familiar because the unconscious has finally found a shape to hold its longing. So when someone falls hopelessly for you, don't just study their behavior. Look at the emotional story running beneath it. They might not be captivated by your face so much as the peace you brought them. Not just your words, but how those words made them feel understood. Not just your charm, but the fact that none of it was a performance. You were simply real. And in a world saturated with performance, authenticity can feel like something close to a miracle. That's why genuine people leave lasting marks, not because they chase memorability, but because sincerity itself is rare enough to imprint. Some people arrive in our lives like thunder, others arrive like light. Thunder startles you and fades, light lingers. And the one who stays in someone's mind usually isn't the loudest presence. It's the one who quietly shifted the entire atmosphere of a room. Here's where things get more unsettling. A love that grows in silence carries its own weight, because when feelings go unexpressed, they don't vanish, they turn inward. They swell in the imagination. They grow louder precisely because they were never spoken aloud. The mind begins constructing entire worlds around a single person. One memory turns into a full-length film. One moment becomes a fantasy. A simple glance becomes a promise. An unanswered text becomes an open wound. This is why obsession can take root after barely any contact at all. It was never really about how much time was spent together, but about the impact of it. A single moment can crack a door open. One look can spark obsession. One small act can start a chase. One boundary can create longing. One absence can create hunger. And once that hunger sets in, the mind starts doing strange things. Replaying, rewinding, questioning, idealizing, imagining, comparing, hoping, aching, trying desperately to make sense of it all. And the harder it tries to understand, the stronger the feeling grows. This is exactly where Jung's insight becomes so useful. He wouldn't simply ask who someone is in love with, he'd ask which archetype they're actually encountering through that person. Which part of themselves is being stirred awake? Which unconscious need is finally being touched? Because so often, we don't fall in love with people themselves, we fall for the image they awaken within us. The rescuer, the muse, the wounded child, the forbidden one, the safe harbor, the person who made a numb heart start beating again. And yes, sometimes the very person who loves you with this kind of intensity is also someone who has never learned how to love gently. They understand intensity, longing, fantasy, and ache intimately. But calm, steady love may be foreign territory to them. This matters because being intensely desired isn't the same as being truly understood. Being idolized isn't the same as being loved well. Being chased isn't the same as being cherished. Being remembered isn't the same as being respected. Still, there's no denying the sheer force of a heart once it's been stirred. When that spark catches, it can grow into a full storm. The person starts noticing everything about you, your timing, your tone, the small habits, your pauses, your moods, even your absences. They become hyper-attuned, reading meaning into every tiny detail, feeling connected to you even from a distance. All because of one simple thing. Something you did reached their soul. Maybe you made them feel chosen. Maybe you made them feel seen without judgment. Maybe you made them feel safe enough to finally be honest. Or maybe, and this matters most, you made them feel something they weren't prepared to lose. That's the exact moment attachment tips into obsession, when admiration curdles into fixation, when attraction becomes something closer to haunting. And that's why some people simply can't move on. Not from weakness, but because something inside them has bonded itself to the experience of knowing you. Have you ever noticed someone who seems completely fine on the outside, while quietly unraveling within, all because of one person? They smile in public, but replay your words in private. They stay busy, yet in every quiet moment, you're who they think of. They act unaffected, but their mind keeps drifting back to the same place. They try to move forward, but every new connection feels hollow, unable to match that same emotional charge. That's what happens with emotional imprinting. You became the reference point, the standard by which everything else gets measured. That's powerful. It's also dangerous, because once you become the standard, ordinary connections stop being enough. Their heart grows restless. Their imagination stays active. Their emotions split in two directions, wanting closure and wanting more. Wanting peace, yet still craving the feeling only you gave them. That's exactly why this matters so much. If someone is desperately in love with you, you're standing right at the edge of something real. A heart that has crossed a threshold it can't easily uncross. And once that line is crossed, everything shifts. Every reply carries weight now. Every silence, every promise, every small gesture, every inconsistency becomes meaningful. A heart that has fallen this deeply doesn't experience your actions casually. It reads them as evidence. Evidence of hope, of rejection, of destiny, of loss, of possibility. Uncertainty feeds imagination. Imagination feeds attachment. Attachment feeds longing. And that longing, painful as it is, only strengthens the bond. But let's return to the deepest truth underneath all of this. Why would someone fall this hard for you? Because you didn't just catch their eye, you reached their unconscious. You didn't just speak to their ears, you spoke directly to the part of them that had been quietly waiting, for longer than they realized, to finally be woken up. Because you didn't just walk into their life, you walked into their inner world. And once someone enters another person's inner world, they're never entirely forgotten. Here's something that might catch you off guard. Sometimes people become fiercely drawn to you, precisely because you're not easily possessed the way they're used to expecting. Not cold, not cruel, not distant, just not something anyone can fully own. You have a sense of self, a center, a life that doesn't revolve around earning anyone's approval. You don't beg to be picked, you simply exist as you are. And that kind of quiet self-possession is magnetic, because most people are conditioned to chase chaos, to get pulled into drama, inconsistency, confusion. So when they encounter someone grounded instead, it registers as a shock. Their nervous system notices the contrast. Their whole being registers the difference, even if their mind can't quite process it. And that's often when attraction curdles into fixation, because the human mind gets most captivated by what it can't neatly file away. Be too available, and people overlook you. Be too needy, and they feel suffocated. But be calm, balanced, and quietly powerful, and they'll feel something they can't name, something that can grow into love. A deep love, sometimes a painful one, a love that lingers long after it should have faded. Jung would remind us that whatever we've suppressed in ourselves, we often go looking for in someone else. Someone who's buried their own tenderness might fall hard for softness. Someone who's lived through chaos might latch onto stability. Someone who's felt invisible their whole life might become consumed by someone who finally makes them feel seen. Someone starved of real connection might cling desperately to the one person who made them feel fed. So if someone is madly in love with you, it's entirely possible you became the answer to a hunger they never even had words for. That's why your presence carries so much weight, why your energy matters, why your actions leave a mark. Because people don't just remember how you looked, they remember how being around you made them feel. And feelings are stubborn. They don't evaporate on command. They don't fade just because time passes. They stay wherever they were nourished. Some of the deepest bonds aren't built on grand gestures at all. They're built on small, repeated moments. A kindness shown again and again, a smile repeated, quiet reassurance offered more than once, even small ruptures and absences that repeat. Over time, the nervous system memorizes your shape. The heart learns your rhythm. The mind writes a story around it. And one day, the person realizes they're not just thinking about you anymore, they're orbiting you. That's when attraction turns into something closer to gravity. And gravity is notoriously hard to resist. Now, when someone falls this hard for you, you're left with two paths. You can grow arrogant and abuse that influence, or you can grow wise enough to recognize that every real connection comes with responsibility. Because once you've touched someone's soul, you're no longer dealing with something casual. You're dealing with something capable of reshaping the entire direction of their life. This is exactly why unfinished connections haunt people, not because those connections were flawless, but because they mattered. They cracked something open. They destabilized something old and summoned something new to life. And even after the relationship ends, that psychological ripple keeps moving. Maybe they never told you what you meant to them. Maybe they played indifferent. Maybe they vanished without explanation. But underneath all of that performance, the feeling stayed alive, because the soul remembers what the mouth refuses to say. Sometimes the most powerful love story is exactly the one that never got spoken aloud. That unspoken silence can turn unbearable. It can turn into poetry, into regret, into obsession, into a question that lingers for a lifetime. That's why people find themselves returning, not always in person, but mentally, emotionally, symbolically. They return through dreams, stray memories, quiet nights, certain songs, certain scents, certain names that catch them off guard. Because you became linked to something bigger than your physical presence. You became linked to their awakening. And once that kind of awakening happens, there's no returning to who they were before. That's the real secret behind so many intense attractions. The person isn't only reacting to you, they're reacting to the version of themselves that surfaces whenever you're near. The self they long to become. The self they're afraid of. The self they miss. The self they thought they'd lost forever. You became a doorway into that self. And doorways like that are nearly impossible to forget. If someone is desperately in love with you, understand this clearly. Love doesn't always announce itself through words. Sometimes it shows up through behavior, persistence, memory, emotional return, vulnerability, or simply an inability to move on. Even then, behavior by itself doesn't tell the whole story, because intensity in the human heart can come from many places, some healthy, some not, some beautiful, some painful. The goal was never to get drunk on being wanted. The real goal is learning to tell the difference between being genuinely loved and simply being projected onto. That's the mature lesson buried in all of this. Still, the mystery lingers. Why you? Why now? Why this particular person, this particular intensity? Maybe your energy was exactly what their psyche had been searching for. Maybe your absence taught them your worth. Maybe your honesty stunned a soul that was used to masks. Maybe your softness melted defenses built over years. Maybe your strength drew out a weakness they'd hidden even from themselves. Maybe being near you was the first time in years they felt genuinely, fully alive. And when someone feels truly alive because of another person, that feeling rarely disappears completely. They might deny it, resist it, run from it, hide behind pride, choose silence over honesty. But the feeling itself doesn't vanish. It waits. It waits in the mind, in the body, in memory, in dreams, in quiet, unguarded moments. And when the noise finally fades and the heart speaks honestly, that's when the truth surfaces. I never moved on. I keep coming back to this. No one else has ever felt like this. This person changed something in me. And maybe, just maybe, that's exactly what happened because of you. Maybe you changed them simply by being who you are, by saying what needed saying, by pulling back when it mattered, by loving fully when you loved, by staying steady while everything else felt uncertain. You left behind a psychological and emotional imprint that refuses to fade. That's why this isn't just a romantic idea, it's something profound. Someone is hopelessly in love with you because you woke up a part of their unconscious mind that now refuses to go back to sleep. Because you made them feel something they hadn't felt in years. Because they see, reflected in you, a truth about themselves they'd been avoiding all along. Because the connection was never only external, it was internal, symbolic, and deeply, unmistakably personal. And if could speak to this directly, it would remind us not to take it lightly. The psyche communicates through attraction, through longing, through the things we keep repeating, through dreams, through projection, through the one image we can't stop returning to. Often the person who pulls at us this strongly isn't just a person, they're a messenger, a mirror, a catalyst for something we needed to confront. So maybe the real point is this. Someone's obsession isn't proof you should hand over your power. It's proof you mattered enough to leave a lasting mark. And marks change people. They alter memory, behavior, desire, even identity. You may have done something so small you forgot it instantly, yet to them, it became unforgettable. One moment of real connection became the reference point for everything after. You met them with warmth when the world had gone cold. You spoke to them with respect when others dismissed them. You walked away with dignity when they braced for collapse. You made them feel seen in a way that was comforting and unsettling all at once. And now their mind keeps circling back, because the psyche never forgets what the heart has crowned. That's the mystery. That's the ache. That's the power. Someone is hopelessly in love with you, and it's because of exactly this you reached a place inside them that had been waiting, untouched, for someone to arrive. You spoke to something old and buried. You gave shape to a feeling they never had words for. You became the emotional event their soul keeps replaying. Now they're not just loving you, they're wrestling with what you did to them. Trying to understand why you still occupy their thoughts. Why your absence carries more weight than someone else's presence. Why their heart keeps circling the same name, unable to fully release what never even fully belonged to them. Because the strongest bonds aren't built through possession. They're built through recognition, through impact, through one person's hidden hunger meeting another's unexpected gift. That's both the tragedy and the beauty of human connection. We meet, we change each other, we move on. But the psyche keeps the receipt. When the impression runs deep enough, it becomes a kind of destiny in the mind, whether or not reality ever catches up to it. So, be mindful of your energy, your kindness, your silence, your honesty, the way you love. People remember, sometimes not in words, but in longing, in quiet obsession, in a lifelong ache for something they once felt in your presence. If you're the one being remembered this intensely, understand you weren't ordinary in their story. You were the turning point, the mirror, the spark, the wound and the healing, both at once. That's why they can't let go. That's why your name still burns quietly in their chest. This was never just attraction. It was psychological, emotional, symbolic, deeply human. Because love, in its truest form, isn't only about being chosen. It's about being understood by the part of someone that has no words for it. It's about becoming a living symbol inside another person's inner world. And once you become that, you're never truly forgotten.